talking about governments, UK defence tech brain drain is next on the docket. So FT story this week. This feels a bit anecdotal and less data-driven. Which I was surprised by from the FT. But the angle here is that UK defence tech founders, not European, but UK defence tech founders, are relocating abroad, not just the States, amid funding and government procurement delays. So policy appetite is up there, but the actual procurement process can take somewhere between 3 and 5 years. So lots of questions around this. Is this real? Are we really losing talent abroad because of funding and the procurement cycles? What does it take? I mean, what can we do at our lower seed and early stage investment stages? What can we do to deal with this? And will the UK government catch up in time? So lots of very broad, open questions.
Lob a brick with a note through the window of the Ministry of Defence. I don't know. It's tricky. This is a buyer problem as much as it is a funding problem. At scale, it's a funding problem.
Andrew, do you do that? Do you invest
we do
in
defence. We do defence tech. Yeah. Less gov tech. But
are you invested in any companies that are the government is their only customer?
Yes,
obviously you've got all the primes and all the segue, right? I mean, I think there are some startups where
some of the space tech and defence tech companies, realistically, are really only government buyers or indirect government buyers. So the buyers are primes who are linked to government contracts. But it's a buyer problem, and this government has a strong line in procrastination. And we know the Strategic Defence Review took ages. They're holding off on spending the money. It comes down to the money again. And later stage scaling is a private market capital problem, as we talk about over and over again on this podcast. But right now, today, the government needs to be issuing contracts for this stuff. Simple as that. And it's not as if the requirement isn't there. It's not as if this is welfare defense contracts. These are needs that the military has desperately.
Yeah. Lomax, where would you take this one?
Look, I think if you want to go very, very big picture on this, is the US spends $1 trillion a year, up nearly $1 trillion a year on defense, and
0.5 isn't
no. I mean, Trump said he wants to grow it to 1.5 trillion next year. I mean, there's still a bunch of approvals that need to happen for that. But they run effectively, the US is still a largely, I would say, martial economy. The Europeans are not, as we know. The UK and France, as two of the big economies in Europe, are basically tapped out on defense budget. And I'll go into a little bit more detail on that. The Germans, interestingly, have a lot more cash for defense now after they, at the beginning of last year, you might remember, removed this fiscal headroom. Merz has allocated 500 billion across industry and or infrastructure and defense, and a large part of that is going to be defense. So the German defense budget could actually be close to 150 billion in the next couple of years. It's going to be, I think, 115 billion euros this year across the different pots. For context, UK is more at like the 60, 70 billion. The problem with the UK is there's actually just no money for this. I think so. Germany has money. Question as to how they're going to spend it. I think that's the big question from chatting to defense founders and investors is there's a chance that Germany,
surely they're going to be bailing out their own auto industry, their own manufacturing industry. That's got to be step one for them.
And sorry, also don't forget that these budgets, technology, which is the world that we live in, is only 10, 15, 20, max 25% of these budgets. Okay, so, a lot of these budgets are going on recruits, barracks, like simple, like old economy
analog stuff.
Yeah. But Andrew alluded to, the Brits are paying a lot of lip service to this, but there's quite clearly no money for this. So the SDR, the Strategic Defence Review, took place in May last year. There was also the Defence Industrial Strategy, which was a follow-up to that, was published in September 25, paying lots of lip service to, the increase of the defence budget to 3% in the next parliament, and that they would release the DIP, the Defense Investment Plan, which is going to actually earmark and outline how the money is going to be spent and with whom, not with whom, but where and on what programs. That was supposed to be done last year. It's still not done and may not be done for a while. So clearly there's a massive disconnect between what the people have been saying and what they maybe want to happen. But when they go and try and cost everything and try and find the money, then which should translate into what the Defense Investment Plan is going to say, that hasn't even been released yet. And this then ties into this article, which is that startups and scale-ups in the UK selling into UK defense are actually really struggling. It's a very bad place to be as a startup because the government is paying lip service to, we want to kind of open the floodgates and do business with you. But actually, they're just like playing for time because they're not really coming through. And they're even willing to sign things. You know, I know companies that have signed big framework agreements with government, but actually under the framework, are projects actually getting signed and cashed up? No. So this then drives founders who operate on 24-month funding cycles, who actually want to build a big business, to go to Germany, which is a tricky one. If you don't speak German, you don't have any German DNA in your company, or to go to the US, where the market is 10 times bigger. And the final thing I'll say is the Americans have a much better history, pedigree, system for integrating and buying new technology into defense. Yes. They have like these programs of record. They have, like the US has a history of doing this. You know, I'll give you one example of a company in our portfolio which is doing suborbital rocket cargo deliveries, delivering high value cargo using rockets anywhere on Earth, which you could argue is a relatively sci-fi concept. But the US has budget for these things. And actually, you can win contracts for this. In Europe, you get laughed out of the room in Europe if you came with this is potentially a very game-changing capability to deliver high-value cargo anywhere on Earth in 75
Europe
minutes.
Hasn't got any high-value cargo to deliver.
Well,
stop it, Andrew.
But I'll maybe end my monologue now. But this is a very, very important. This article is bang on. I know you say this is anecdotal, but a lot of things that precede and seed are anecdotal because that's the sort of world that we live in. Because there's still no limited data and lack of information.
The last two defense tech companies I spoke to that were both UK, both actually in drones, they were relocating to the Bay, and one has just raised 6 mil seed and the other 10 mil seed, and they did it in 4 weeks. So
the final point I'll say is Anduril is, how old's Anduril? 7 years old, 8 years old?
Not even, is it?
Not even. Probably not even.
I thought it was 6.
This just won a $20 billion contract with the US. I mean, it's a 10-year, 5+5 contract, but a $20 billion contract, basically a startup. It's the same age as probably some of the European equivalents. A $20 billion. It's unbelievable.